assessments. We'll talk about life skills before high school, grade 9, 10, 11, 12. And then we will talk about some work experience, power of attorney, co-decision making, and guardianship. And then we'll go to planning for after high school, staying in school until 22, transition planning outcomes, adulthood, and then we'll end with resources. So what is transition planning? So the purpose of transition planning. Transition planning service is designed to help any individual transition successfully out of high school and into adult life. Planning will identify goals and objectives, timelines, roles, and responsibilities. The planning process will work towards facilitating self-advocacy and independent living skills and toward developing natural supports for the student in his or her future environment. So to begin the planning process, it's important to identify a vision for the future. It's important to set realistic long-term and short-term goals that can be obtained by the individual and the team and work towards achieving that vision. Transition planning should be set up with the individual and not for the individual. The individual should always be a part of the whole process along the way. So for students who feel uncomfortable attending the meetings, we do ask that they come say hi and that their wishes for the future are expressed. The student should be working on getting comfortable speaking for themselves and expressing their wishes as the process goes on. So nobody should be speaking on behalf of the student. The team can express their thoughts and ideas, but overall the student should have their own say. And how early do I start transition planning? So you can start transition planning at any point, but it's ideal to start in grade 9. We start the transition planning process as early as age 15. We primarily focus on advising individuals on how best to navigate a transition, making referrals, making connections to other community-based organizations, and providing tools and resources for transition planning. So who should be a part of the meeting? It is important to create a collaborative team. The team should include the student, family members, teachers, EAs, CLSD, and Inclusion Saskatchewan. Some other people that you may want to include on your team would be doctors, psychologists, speech and language pathologists, occupational therapists. You can have autism services, social workers, mental health workers. You can have neighbors, family, friends, and any other organization that you think will be beneficial for the planning process. It is important to have at least one lead person who can help run the team and keep the meeting on track. So often the lead is the teacher, as they already are doing planning with the individual and they know that individual very well. The lead is responsible for setting the meeting up, leading the conversation, and keeping people on track. If teachers are not planning or running the meetings, parents should contact the school to make sure a transition planning process is being set up. It is important for parents to be a part of the plan and take on some of the roles too. So the roles and responsibilities of the school, parent, and other community-based organizations should be outlined. By doing this, everyone knows what their role is, and everyone is aware of the capacity of work other team members can participate in. There is no task missed. All the work won't be put on one person, and this will also help you eliminate or prevent overlap of services. Overall, more brains mean more ideas of supports and services. And just remember that everyone can help in a different way. So the school's role is to help the student begin the transition planning process. Teachers can help the student describe their goals and dreams while supporting the family and the student to get answers to questions about the student's future. Teachers can also help decide who should be invited to the meeting and create the agenda, making sure important items are covered at the meeting. And then there's the parents' role, which is to take an active part in your students' transition and schooling. Remember that transition planning is a team effort, so be sure to discuss who is doing what before and throughout the process. And then the student's role is to work with their parents or guardians and teachers through the transition planning process to figure out what their plan for the future is. The student should be encouraged to use their voice to express what their wishes are. The student should be working on life skills at home and at school to gain the skills they will need after high school. It's also important to respect differences. Planning will not work well if differences aren't respected and worked out in a healthy way. So when concerns arise, it's important to reach out to the school staff. Schools often welcome parent communication. However, if you find that your concerns are not being heard, we advise that you move up in the chain of command. We will demonstrate this in the points below. So starting with the teachers. So who you should contact and when you should contact them. So you should contact a teacher when a student is complaining about being treated poorly or not wanting to go to school. You are concerned about the student's progress, classroom placement, and you see signs of changed behavior in a student. And then you should contact the school principal if you are concerned about a student's educational program or the services they are being offered. Principals are responsible for establishing an effective learning environment for your student. And then you should contact the school board. If the principal is unable to resolve a matter, you may request the Board of Education review the issue. And then there's the Ministry of Education. We don't recommend contacting the Ministry of Education regarding issues related directly to a single student. The ministry is responsible for establishing goals, objectives, and regulations for the entire Saskatchewan education system. And then here are just some tips for when approaching a meeting. It is important to remember that it's okay to ask for a meeting. If the meeting has not been set up, you can take initiative and get the ball rolling. It is important to approach a meeting with a calm and respectful demeanor. Whether you're upset, frustrated, or just nervous about the meeting, remember your son or daughter's team is there to help you, so be respectful while making your points. Sometimes we think going into meetings and laying down the law will help, but in our experience, this often does more harm than good. Before you have a meeting, write down the main points you'd like to talk about so you don't forget anything, and so you have time to think about those points before bringing them up in the meeting. In any meeting you're going into, it's good to take notes so you can go back and read what was said. And if you're uncomfortable going to meetings alone, you can take a friend or an advocate of some kind, but we suggest that you let the school know if you are bringing someone to attend with you. And it's also okay to get emotional at the meeting. You'll be discussing big changes in your child's life, and sometimes this can be overwhelming and very emotional. And just remember to ask lots of questions. This is the time to ask a lot of questions and get them answered, so you have a better understanding of what the future may look like for your child. And it's very important for the transition plan to be person-centered. So person-centered planning is a process used to support people to achieve their life goals by using a variety of tools and approaches best suited to the person's preference. The process has the person at the center of all planning, with a core group of people who know, care for, and support them. Oftentimes, everyone has different ideas and plans than the individual, but it's important to give the individual a say in their own plan. Planning should be centered around what the student wants for their life. It's important that we give the student control over their future. We can give the student some ideas and help educate them on some issues with their plan or guide them to a more realistic plan, but overall the decision does need to be theirs. Giving the student control and voice over their future helps to ensure the student is less stressed about the whole process. This will also help the student build their independence. The team should all have the goal of supporting the student. Focus should be on the student. Also, a lot of organizations are person-centered, meaning that we follow what the individual wants and support them in a setting of supports for their future. And a lot of organizations will not push to work with students if they do not want to work with us. It is their decision whether or not they would like these organizations to be involved. And create independence in the student. So oftentimes we may think that we're helping the student by doing things for them, but in reality, when we are doing everything for them, we're not allowing them to build independence. It's important to promote independence while the student is younger. We want to make sure your son or daughter is building these skills when they're younger, because they will not always have someone there to help them. And then how often should meetings be called? So it's suggested to have meetings at least twice a year, but there is no set amount of time the team should be meeting. It is suggested that additional meetings should be held if, for example, if additional supports are needed, if the plan is not working or the goals need to change, if goals have been achieved and new goals need to be set, or if something major happened to change the plan. And where is the transition meeting being held? So the transition meetings are often held at school, as the teacher is often planning with the student already. And then we just have an example of what a transition planning meeting agenda could look like. So we usually start with introductions, just go around the table and everyone introduces themselves. We outline strengths, interests, and goals by the student and the family. The school describes the school day and the student's classes and what that looks like. And then the parents can describe what home life is like for their son or daughter. And then they set up a plan of areas to work on and the next steps for that year. And then summarize who is doing what and when, and then set the next meeting date. And here are some important pieces of information about transition planning. So identify a vision for the future, set realistic long-term and short-term goals that can be attained by the individual and the team and work towards achieving that vision. So while creating this vision, it's important to think about timeframes with wait lists or emerging needs lists and how much people have on their plates. Identify what is available to the student in their area and in the province, as well as the supports and services that can help the individual determine what their future plan will be. This will take some research in finding supports in the student's area. You can break down goals and work into pieces. This will help the plan not be so overwhelming. A transition plan must be flexible. It's always changing over 4 years. You may see the plan one way in grade 9, but by grade 12, your plan can be completely different. And this is normal. The most important part of this is that the student know their options and they're able to make good decisions and get resources and connections made to plan successfully by grade 12. And it is often difficult to get ideas out of students. They never have to think about these areas and they don't always know what they want for their future. Students tend to be used to having things set up for them, but it's important for the student to be a part of the transition planning process and to discuss what they want for their future. So just kind of how to pull some ideas out of the students. So you can ask open-ended questions. So this ensures that the student can't simply answer with just a yes or no. They have to open up and discuss and really think about what they want and ask lots of questions. Use the student's team of supports to assist in the brainstorming process and include the individual. So make sure the questions are always being directed towards the individual. It's okay for the parents to have some input, but the questions should not be directed at the parents. They should be directed towards the individual. And how to pull ideas from students about employment they would enjoy. So it's good to ask what their interests are, ask what they enjoy to do in their personal time, ask about their previous work experience, what did they like about that work placement and why, what did they dislike about it and why, what businesses are located around them. So also consider that transportation may also be a factor when looking into employment. So look around the neighborhood and get a feel of what job opportunities are actually out there. And then when it comes to transition planning and pulling ideas from students about what they would like the transition process to include, it is important to first figure out what options are out there. You do not want to present an option that may not be possible for the students. So once you know all the options, then you can discuss those options with them. And remember to ask a lot of questions so you get a good understanding of what the student wants for their future. And I will now hand it over to Marcy, who will discuss some maps and paths with you.
Perfect. Okay. So there is a few tools that you can use to really help out with this planning piece. The first one is a map. So it stands for Making Action Plans. So action plans are a guide that helps you to get from one place to another. They help you to find out where you are and where you want to go. They include a team of supports around the individual. They contain dreams, fears, strengths, needs, and plans of action for the individual, and they require a facilitator to work with the individual and the team to develop that plan. It's sometimes difficult to find someone who knows how to do a map, but it is important to find someone who has a little bit of training on maps, and it's an awesome tool. The next one is paths. So planning alternative tomorrows with hope. Plans or paths are really good visual aids and planning tools for discussing dreams, goals, what's happening now, who do you want to enroll in the team, what steps you want to make forward into the future. And even like dreams is the biggest part. We want people to dream. We want people to look at what they want for their future, even if it's something that you don't think is realistic. Paths are great tools that help create a support team around the individual. So it's great because you can have team members from every avenue, and the individual works different with different people, right? So it's important to have a good team, a good collaborative team. They can be done at home, in a place of employment, in church, at a school, really wherever the individual chooses. And paths are done with 2 facilitators. So one is the drawer and writer, and one is the person leading. And once again, too, this is a nice area to find someone who knows how to do these, because they're not easy and they won't be done properly if you don't have someone who can do them really well. So that could be like a CLSD worker, or shall I say community living service delivery worker, a teacher, or someone from an organization. And this is what a path looks like. So it's very colorful. There's lots of dreams and aspirations. There's lots of pictures. And here, as you can see the columns here, like this is where things are now. This is who we want to enroll on the team. You'll even see that the words that are written are in color. That's important. So there's all of these categories. There's dreams, a dream bubble here. There's a vision here. There's lots of pictures. There's lots of descriptions of what that individual wants to do, some challenges and opportunities. So it's a good tool, and it's great visually. You want to see all of the wonderful things. You want to see the dreams. You want to see the aspirations. That's so important. And then moving into the three main areas of transition planning. So these three areas are the areas we typically start off with, but there are so many more areas that you'll bring into the planning piece. So the first one is vocational. So that's, what do you want to do during the day after high school? Once school is done, you don't really have anything to do. So what does that look like? Residential, where do you want to live? And recreational is who are your friends going to be and what type of activities are you wanting to get involved with? And this is important because that social aspect of all of our lives, we need that. We need that. And I'm sure we kind of all have seen that with COVID being present in our lives and not being able to go out and socialize. So that's an important piece. So all of these pieces we'll describe in a bit more detail, a little bit lower down, and we'll kind of explain what it could look like for students. So the next piece is the assessment piece. So assessments are really important for getting the supports and services set up before the student leaves high school. And there's two main assessments that I'll go over here for you. The first one is the psychoeducational assessment. So this one is conducted by a registered psychologist. It shows a lot of teenagers and children kind of the best style of learning for them, which is very helpful, especially in a school setting, but even afterwards, setting up supports and services. It can provide a diagnosis of different disabilities, such as like a learning disability, intellectual disability, a developmental disability, even different types of like behaviors, lots of different things. And I think that if you can kind of identify some of those things, that really helps with that support piece. The assessment is good for referral for external services or supports, such as community living service delivery or post-secondary. Those are the two kind of most common ones that we see, but there is other ones as well. So with community living service delivery, they have a mandate of an intellectual disability. So in order to receive their services, they require a copy of psychoeducational assessment. We do recommend that people get connected a little bit earlier in high school, because there is one done around grade 7, 8. But if not, this is something students are going to need after high school. They will need this to get connected with CLSD. And CLSD can be a part of that transition planning process. So they can help with the actual planning meetings. They can contribute with respite, housing, day programs, and case management. So having that extra support is very helpful. And then, as I mentioned before, it also helps out with post-secondary supports. So it's for accommodations, supports in the school, anything like that. You actually can't receive the supports unless you have some type of information to give to the post-secondary institute. They won't just give anybody any support. So this really helps them determine what level of support the student's really going to need to set those supports up. And if you cannot get an assessment, the recommendation is to get a letter from the school that kind of talks about what accommodations the student is going to require. The other assessment that I'll talk to you about here is the vocational assessment. So it's done through Saskabilities. It is used to determine the vocational and employment skills as an individual has, like what an individual has. It captures interest, skills, and makes further recommendations to support the individual in developing their skills towards employment. So this one's really more focused on employment. And any student with barriers to employment may be eligible. And yes, okay, so I'm going to hand it over to my coworker, and she's going to talk about life skills.
All right, so instilling life skills into students' lives is so important. The earlier the student is able to work on life skills, the more skills they will have before entering adulthood. There'll be so many new skills that the student will be introduced to, and it can be overwhelming for the student when they leave high school. Students are used to having their lives or having lots of structure and a plan in their lives. The more independence the student has, the better equipped they will be for adulthood. Some of these tasks are tasks you can start learning from a young age, but all of them should be worked on starting in grade 9 if the student hasn't started working on them already. So some life skills that an individual can work on doing independently include meal planning, they can grocery shop, cleaning the house, laundry, money management and budgeting, setting up appointments, learning more about how to disclose and explain a disability, and asking for help. Some other life skills that the student can be working on include practicing personal hygiene, taking the bus, or using other methods of transportation, learning how to deal with conflicts, learn how to build healthy relationships, learn about boundaries. They can learn about appropriateness, learn about self-care, and just overall learn like how to advocate for themselves. So before high school starts, it is important to start the student off with as much information and support as we can give. If we can start the process off before high school, the transition from elementary school to high school will not be as so difficult or overwhelming. This applies to students and their parents or guardians. So start collecting information about the student. So it is recommended that each student keep a portfolio where they can collect personal information and assessments throughout high school. This information collection, along with the life skills we just went through, are things that can be worked on before the student enters high school and throughout high school. This will help the student start off ahead of the game, which will be highly beneficial to the transition planning process. Here are some pieces of information that should be collected to help the student with this transition. You can build a profile and collect information to better understand the needs and supports the student requires. Make sure to update the information every year as it can change. In the portfolio, you can include a section about getting to know yourself. So we provided a sample tool for this in our first webinar. So some example questions on the tool would be things like, what do I want to be when I get older? What skills and abilities am I good at? How do I deal with conflict? How do I communicate? And what areas do I need to work on? You can also include a section on independence. This would include questions such as, what life skills do I participate around my house? What skills have I worked on or learned about at school? What skills can I start working on now? And then add a section on tools and supports the student uses. So what tools and supports work for me? What supports do I currently have at school? What supports do I have at work? What tools don't work for me? What tools would I be interested in trying? You can also have a section on conflict and communication. So ask questions like, how do I deal with conflicts? And how do I communicate my needs? This collection of information will be beneficial to look at each year and see what areas are strengths for the student and what areas still need to be worked on. It will help the student support system build a better understanding of who the student is and what their needs are. And when developing a plan for the future, it's important to keep in mind what program the student is in high school, whether it is the functionally integrated program, alternative education, or modified education. The program your child is in is determined by the psych ed assessment that they had done near the end of elementary school. It is important that you as parents are educated on the program your child is in so you are aware of what the difference in programming is. And also keep in mind how this program can affect your child's future plans. This is important to keep in mind because if students' future goal is to attend post-secondary, you need to be aware that not all post-secondary programs accept students who took an alternative program in high school, but there certainly is options. And it's important to be realistic about the students' goals for the future based on the programming that they are taking. It's important to include the students' future plans in the portfolio also. It is never too early to start discussing the future and developing a plan. So while discussing future plans, you should consider what fears do I have about the future? What are my goals for high school? And what are my goals for after high school? It is important to keep looking at this profile every year and making changes as the years go on. And now Marcy will go on to discuss the first year of high school and what that looks like.
Oh, there we go. Just needed to unmute myself. Okay. So we have created a transition handbook guide and a transition handbook, or transition planning workbook. And we'll discuss those a little bit more in detail later. The guide has some checklists that we've created, is kind of some essential things that we know that students need to get done at certain times. Not all of the check boxes will apply to every student, but it's kind of just a guide. And we know based on a lot of research that we've done that that is an area that people need some guidance. So the plan may vary for each student. A lot of parents and students need lots of time to process a plan or to even come up with the options. And so that's why we recommend starting in grade 9. So 4 years is a great amount of time. And a lot of parents will say to me, why are we starting so early? But once you get into the planning process, you'll really understand how quick it goes and how much planning is a part of this. So it's also important to know what all of your options are and lay them out on the table for yourself so that you can make a really educated decision on what would really work for the student. And they can also make an educated decision. We actually have a lot of parents and students that don't have the same plan in mind, which is very interesting. So I'm always interested to hear both sides. What does the parents think that the student should do after high school, and what does the student think? So we actually have lots of people that will come to us in grade 11 or grade 12, which is okay, but that's still not a lot of time to do a transition plan and to set a successful transition plan up. Can be very overwhelming, and just the plan does not come together the way you'd really hope it would. We've even had students that come to us 6 months before graduation or after graduation and say, okay, we're ready for transition planning. But unfortunately, that you definitely will not be able to set a plan up. And so a lot of the services and supports are not going to be like the teacher is in the school, where they're there to help you kind of along the way. You're going to have to pick up a lot of the pieces. And so it gets a little scary. So not that there isn't organizations out there that won't help, but this is important to start the process off earlier so that that's not panic mode that you have to be in. So grade 9 is where you're really just kind of starting the process. You're kind of dipping your toe in, I always say. You are kind of introducing yourself to very basic tasks. There is very overwhelming for a lot of students that are coming from elementary school into high school. That's a transition as well, and it can be a very difficult one. Elementary school and high school are very different in the services and supports they set up, and even in just how they run every day. And so we've heard from a lot of parents that this is a really difficult time to do transition planning because they're already overwhelmed by what it looks like. And so little tasks are important to start here, just little things that you can check off the list. So here are some things that you can work on. So getting a social insurance number. A lot of organizations that the student is going to work with will need that social insurance number. We definitely do. You need to continue compiling that information. Students change quite a bit during transitions. And transitions from elementary to high school or high school out into adulthood, you're going to see those change. And so maybe it's tools and supports that are needed. Maybe it's a certain way they do things. Every little bit of information that you can get is going to help in some way, shape, or form after high school in any supports or service that they're going to be a part of. Working on getting to know yourself profile, that profile that Jasmine was talking about. It's a little bit more information about yourself. I think it's important. The more you know about yourself, the easier it's going to be for you to figure out what you need for supports and from people around you. And you can start communicating that with people. Transportation is another big one. It sounds funny to start transportation this early, but if you have to use a bus system, I haven't used a bus system in a long time, but I've seen some individuals using the bus system, and I don't know how they do it. It's very complex. There's definitely some apps and things out there, but the longer you are able to practice it, the better you're going to get at it. So it could be a bus system. It could be practicing for a driver's license. It could be getting set up with paratransit. It could be learning safety things. It could be a variety of different things. It really depends on what each individual needs. And then getting connected with community living service delivery. So this, as I was talking about in the assessment portion, this is really important here. So you're not necessarily doing a lot of big planning meetings, but this is an introduction. And if you can get them connected here, you can use your psychoeducational assessment from grade 7 or 8 to get them connected early on. So that's at least one service of support that you can check off the list before student leaves high school. It is also important to learn what transition planning is and what it consists of. I think if you have a good idea of what a transition plan looks like, it's easier to go into that transition plan. If you're kind of going in blindly, it's scary and it's very overwhelming, and it kind of makes you push back a little bit. So it's really important that you and the student really know what that looks like. And think about who could be a part of the team. This is a great time to start asking people if they could be a part of that team. It could be anyone. It could be a neighbor. It could be a sibling. It could be a family friend. It could also be an organization. And as you're going through the planning process, there's going to be more organizations and supports that will come up that you can add to the team. So this is the time to really just get those small things done. Those are just very easy things that you can do. And when you go into grade 10, you'll be much more prepared for the process. Grade 10 is where the planning really starts, the major planning really. So here are some areas that you should be looking at working on. A team should be established at this point. So you've already been asking people last year. Now this team should be coming together. You should be planning meetings. You should be continuing to add people to the meetings. You should start conversations about vocational, residential, recreational. So what is that going to look like after school? Exploring community options in the province as well, and exploring organizations, agencies, anybody who can really be a part of that process, bringing CLSD in to start having those conversations about housing and day programs, doing some brainstorming for right after high school, 5 years down the line, and then 10 years down the line, because everybody's transition looks different. And sometimes when you get to the end of grade 12, all of a sudden the student decides that they want to leave high school and you don't have any plans in place. So it's really important to start brainstorming early, and it's really important to start having additional plans. So don't just put all your eggs in one basket. Look at the plans and figure out which ones you can set up as plan A, plan B, and plan C. Grade 11. So grade 11 is where you really should see things coming together. This is where you should see organizations that have done some footwork. You guys should be doing a little bit more work to kind of get those programs in place and within the day-to-day, or talking about what that's going to look like after high school. This is really important. So here's some things you should be working on. You should be establishing what this looks like in more detail. So the details you should be working on those. You should have your team together and have them talking about how they can help out in each of these aspects. If the individual doesn't have a psych ed assessment, if the student does not have that already, this is the time to do it. A lot of schools have told us that they won't do them in grade 12. So this is where you start having those conversations about, is this needed, and should we go forth, and how do we go forth? You should have some names on waiting lists and emerging needs lists. That's really important. The earlier the better. You need to get your name on there so that if that decision to, say, move out or be in a day program after high school is coming up, you have your name on the list, and you don't have to wait a little bit longer. They know about you at least. And the waiting lists are a little bit different for different programs. So get the names on the waiting lists right away. That's really important. Looking into post-secondary institutes, that's another really important one. What types of schooling, if that's the stream you're taking, what type of schooling do you want? Where do you want to go? If employment is the stream that you'd like to take, what work experiences are you a part of? Where can you start collecting some information on what you like and what you don't like with past work experiences, making sure you're a part of more work experiences. You can do as many as you want in a year. You don't have to do one each semester. You can do more than one each semester if you want to. Starting having those conversations and really making sure people are involved. 4th year of high school, grade 12, this is the year where you should see a lot of that planning in place. So probably by mid-year, you should really have a lot of it in place. And you should be waiting on the waiting list to get back to you, and some of those kind of smaller details that you really need to map out. You should be looking at that stuff. So some of the things that you can do, that you can work on would be, again, that emerging needs list or those waiting lists, making sure that the student is a part of those lists right away. You should be getting a bit more information back or having more conversations about what that looks like. You should be working on getting the student applying for Saskatchewan Assured Income for Disability, or also known as SAID. We'll describe that a little bit later down too. On the 18th birthday of the student. If you're having difficulties with that, you can get your community service delivery worker or your CLSD worker involved. If by chance you do not fit the CLSD mandate, which we do see a lot of students like that, we do have community inclusion consultants that can provide a little bit of guidance. So there is some options. Don't feel like if your child or if you as a student aren't connected to them that you don't have options, because that's there's definitely some people out there that can give you a little bit of guidance. And then you should be looking at those three areas again, that vocational, the recreational, and the residential, and you should be making sure that those pieces are really coming together, all of them. Okay. I am going to hand this over to my coworker Jasmine. She's just going to give a little description of some work experience.
All right, work experience. So studies show that individuals with disabilities experience 75% unemployment rates. Work experience is a very important part of transition planning and future employment. If work experience is done correctly, it could lead to successful employment after high school. It is hard to find a job for students when they leave high school if they do not have good work experience and have not had time to build on their skills and abilities. We've experienced issues such as it taking 1 year to 2 years for a student to find a job after high school because of the lack of work experience and skill building and the lack of work experience that resembles real work. So here are some reasons why work experience is so important. So they have the opportunity to meet employers. They learn unwritten rules such as how to take time off, what to say, what not to say, how to act at work. They can learn what you like and don't like in a job. You have the opportunity to get used to getting criticism from employers, opportunity to work on time management, learn about boundaries, learn how to deal with conflicts, learn how to communicate, learn how to build relationships with others appropriately, and learn what tools are beneficial in a job. It is so important for work experience to resemble real work. So students can start out with doing work experience in the school, but it's important that they branch out of the school at a certain point. If work experience is only done in the school, the student will not learn the important skills that are taught in a real work setting. Expectations are often different from outside businesses than in the school setting also. It is very important that the student understand the importance of work experience and it takes the experience serious like it is a real job. If you do not take it seriously, it portrays a bad image to the employer and they will not consider hiring the student. Whether you get the job or not, you still need to take it seriously. The employer will not give you a good reference check that could help you get a job after school if you did not perform well during your work experience. Work experience can be done in different ways. So there is only so much funding for EA support for work experience. So if this is something teachers are struggling with, they may have 2 or 3 students who have similar interests go to work at an experience together. If the student is paired up with other students, it's important to make sure the students are building independence and being evaluated separately. There are programs created in schools, such as a canteen or cafeteria area, where skills with money management, working with other people, and other skills could be built. It's okay to start out with work experience in the school like this, as students haven't worked before and they need to gain some basic skills. There is no such thing as failure. It is important that we are letting the student learn to be independent and to build the necessary skills to be successful. Let students know that sometimes they may make mistakes and that's okay. You can't grow if people aren't giving you the room to fall sometimes and learn from your mistakes. It's okay to have some falls. We've all experienced this. These are opportunities that help us learn and grow and make us who we are. The most successful way to help a student secure employment after high school is to work on turning work experience into paid employment. This gives students time to build on their skills and abilities, to establish a relationship with their potential boss and any employees that the individual works with. This also gives the employer the opportunity to see how the student works and to work on training the individual so they can become the type of employee the employer is looking to hire. So how to turn work experience into paid employment. A lot of employers will say they are evaluating the students the same as they would any other employee until they're asked to hire that employee, and then they change the review. It's so important to stress that the student needs to be evaluated as an employee of theirs so the student can work on increasing their skills and abilities and be ready for employment. Mark Wafer is a business owner of 8 Tim Hortons in Ontario. He also has a disability himself, being hearing impaired. He sees a huge benefit of hiring people with disabilities and looks at it from a business perspective. He has many videos online that explain why hiring people with disabilities makes great business sense. This helps us approach work experience placements and potential employers in the correct way. And we highly suggest you watch some of Mark's videos if you want to know more about that. If the student is wanting to pursue paid employment, encourage them to establish a relationship with your employer before they have that discussion about being hired for paid employment. So here are some situations when you could encourage students to try and turn their work experience into paid employment. So if you think a work experience could turn into paid employment and the individual is looking to work outside of school, if you and the student feel the student can work independently, it is encouraged to try to turn the work experience into paid employment a few months before the student is about to leave school. Therefore, they have the job lined up for after they completed high school. You can also get support from an employment agency before the student leaves school. You can involve other agencies that can help you with bridging work experience with paid employment at any point in the process. And there will be a list of agencies that you could possibly be in your area, in which we'll talk about in a bit. The list only includes a few, but it may give you some ideas. If work experience is not able to be turned into paid employment, it will be really important for an employment agency to be introduced before the completion of school, so the connection is made and that the process can continue. And I will now hand it back to Marcy.
Awesome. So we are really lucky. We have a special guest that's going to come and present some information for us. She is our coworker, Chandria. She works with a lot of people that are looking at power of attorney, co-decision making, and guardianship. So I'm going to let her kind of explain things to you and give you a little bit of information. And so I'll pass it to you, Chandria.
Sounds good. Everybody can hear me okay?
Oh.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, if you just want to pop over to the next slide. I am far from an expert in this area. It's quite a vast area with lots of information. So I'm just going to give a quick little overview of the different areas of basically legal support. So having a legal document in place in order to provide an individual with support. I'll also mention that a lot of my support goes into alternatives to having these documents in place. So essentially, an individual needs to be 18 years of age in order to have someone as their power of attorney. A power of attorney can only be made by somebody who can understand the nature and effect or impact of that document. There's two areas of a power of attorney. So there's personal and property. So I'm sure you can guess what some of those personal affairs would be, which would be supporting somebody to maybe hire a cleaner in their home, or what their support will look like, or things like that. And then the property power of attorney oversees more of like those financial matters and those sorts of things. The individual has the autonomy with choosing their power of attorney. They can choose 2 people for each one. They can have one or the other. And they can also get rid of their power of attorney at any time. The last thing I'll mention about power of attorney is that a power of attorney cannot make healthcare decisions on an individual's behalf. That would have to be an individual filling out somebody to become their proxy. So a proxy is able to be enlisted to make healthcare decisions, but a power of attorney cannot. That's one of the most common questions I get asked about, I would say, is, okay, my son or daughter is turning 18. I'm no longer that decision maker for them. And what happens if they go into the hospital or something like that? What rights do I have as a parent? So I'll chat a little bit more if you just want to go to the next slide there. About this co-decision making and guardianship. They are both a legal process where an application gets put forward to the Court of Queen's Bench. So the intention with a co-decision maker is that the individual will remain autonomous in their life and get to make some of those decisions for themselves. And the intention as well is that the individual gets the final say. However, there may be issues pertaining to safety, mainly where that decision maker would be able to step in. But essentially, it's still a decision-making document. It's still recognized by the healthcare system, for example. If you are a co-decision maker within the healthcare system, you are the person called upon. If you are a co-decision maker, that's recognized by Canada Revenue Agency and so on, the said program, etc. So again, the intention and the difference between co-decision making and guardianship is that there is the intention with co-decision making that the options are going to be presented to that individual and there will be kind of an agreement. That doesn't mean that it's just very much a reciprocal relationship is the intention between that. Guardianship is definitely the most extreme measure to support an individual because the guardian can ultimately take away that autonomy and gets the final say in most circumstances, depending on the type of guardianship that they have. So that's only if they're obtaining both personal and property guardianship. So personal can actually, in terms of co-decision making and guardianship, personal can apply to the healthcare system, like I said before. Property guardianship has to do, again, with those like finances and things like that. But again, there's other less restrictive measures that can be put in place, such as maybe becoming a trustee to assist somebody with their SED or with the bank or things like that. With Canada Revenue Agency, you can list somebody, and I just want to check on the term for what it's called, to have somebody be able to make those phone calls and things like that in terms of the Canada Revenue Agency. I'm just looking at it. I just pulled up one of my documents, so give me 1 second as I scroll through. So it's called, oh, it's simple enough. It's called a representative. So a representative, an application to become a representative can be made on the Canada Revenue website. In terms of healthcare, like I said, if the individual has the ability to understand what the impact of their decisions are and things like that, that's something that the doctor would be able to determine, in which case an individual can not only have a proxy, but they can also have a healthcare directive filled out that also explains their wishes, which is also helpful for that proxy to have and know their wishes. There's lots of families who become concerned, like I said, about healthcare. So if the individual does not have, is not deemed to have capacity when they go into the hospital, and that's determined by the doctors as such, then it goes down next of kin. So the first at next of kin, the first person they're going to call is a spouse. The second is an adult child. And the third would be a parent. So it's really important to just know what the options are. And like I said, that's a huge area of my work, is to kind of know those alternatives. The other thing that I'll mention is that lots of people think that co-decision making and guardianship entail hiring a lawyer, which they don't. All of the information and applications can be found on the Government of Saskatchewan website. There's guardianship toolkits and so on. Public guardian and trustee is involved in every co-decision making and guardianship order. And parameters are put in place to keep people safe and so on. So it is an extensive process. It's definitely appropriate in certain situations, but there's also lots of alternatives that can be tried. So, and I'm not sure, Marcy, how you're sort of fielding questions, but what's your plan for that? I wasn't here for the beginning, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I was just going to say, if I don't see any questions on the chat, but if there is anyone that has questions, Chandria won't be here the whole time. She's going to be stepping off. She has some other places to go. So if you have questions, please, please, please put them in the chat box right now. I know it's a lot of information to take in. And if you think of something afterwards, you're always welcome to contact us. But if you have questions, now's a really great time to make sure that she's here to answer them, because we're not as much of experts as she is. She does a lot of work in this area. So she knows a little bit more than what we would know. So please, 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 if you have questions, now's the time.
I am far from an expert, but yes, if anybody has anything that they'd like to know, perhaps before I pop off, I will just give a couple minutes. Marcy will go further into the said program, but like I said, there's trusteeship for that. There's lots of support that can be put in place. Marcy will also, or Jasmine, I'm not actually too sure whose part that is, but we'll talk about also supported decision making, incredibly useful tool in terms of those who are in that individual support network to help them make decisions that fit for the individual, as well as comfortable decisions for their supports as well. So there's lots of good tools out there. I don't want to pop off too quickly here, but it doesn't look like there's any questions for me. So
I was just going to mention too, so Chandria is, we're going to get more into this, and Jasmine will explain a bit more about Chandria's role. But just so you know, the difference between us and Chandria is that Chandria works with a lot of adults after high school. And so when a lot of people don't have a plan made up, or there's kind of pieces of their plan that are falling through, she sees a lot of that fall. She sees a lot of the areas, the gaps, I guess, if you want to say. And so it's great to have her come and speak about some of this stuff, because she is the one that will see some of those issues when it comes to like a bank, issues with a bank, and someone being 18 and then can't have mom and dad come and speak on their behalf, or things like that come up. She's really the one that sees a lot of that stuff going on and works with those individuals to kind of figure out what needs to be done next. So she's just a wealth of knowledge, and her and I are both in the same office, and we just love each other to pieces, and we work together a lot with a lot of individuals. So yeah, if you put a question on here and it's meant for her, I can always go back and ask her and make sure you get the answer as well.
Yeah, you're very complimenting, Marcy. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I'm gonna pop off, and absolutely, if anybody has any questions afterwards, just let me know.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Jen.
You bet. Take care, everyone.
Perfect. I believe, I'm next. Perfect. Had to think there for a second. So the next area that we're going to talk about is planning after high school. So that would be a part of it, is looking into some of those options that are really important. So planning after high school, there's a lot of pieces, and this is what you're going to be talking about when you're planning throughout high school. These are the options that you really want to look into. You want to narrow it down, figure out what this looks like. And like Jasmine has said earlier, plans change. And so, grade 9, you might think it's one way, grade 11, it might be something different, and that's okay. That happens. We change. We see things in a different perspective. Our families change, and that's okay. So the 3 areas that I had went over before, the vocational, the residential, and recreational, I'm just going to get into them a little bit more so you kind of get an idea of what we're talking about. So vocational is, what do I want to do during the day? So that could include a day program, that could be an employment, that could be going to post-secondary. it also is going, you're also going to talk a lot about like what are the support pieces that are needed, what connections should we be making beforehand, should we be going to the post-secondary institute and having that conversation, or if work is something that the avenue the student wants to take, should we be getting someone in here to have that conversation about paid work, what supports can we get for that. This is kind of where you dive into it a bit more. Residential is where you're going to live. And I know this is an area that I get so much it's scary for people. It's scary for the student and it's scary for the parents. It's interesting because everybody's a little bit different, and sometimes the parents are scared and that the student is ready to go. I'm moving out. This is how I'm doing it. So that's why we always say plan for after high school and then plan for 5 years and 10 years, because you just never know where you're going to be in that 4 years. 4 years it seems like a long time, but it really isn't that long. So it's important to really have those conversations. Get CLSD involved. They're going to be helping out with that process. They're going to be helping out with those supports that can be in place. And like I said too, if someone doesn't fit CLSD, that's okay. There's other people in the province that can provide supports, including our inclusion consultants. They can give that guidance and that support to a lot of individuals that don't fit that mandate. We don't want people to fall through the cracks, so that's important to us. And then recreational is the other one. So who will my friends be and what types of activities am I going to get involved with? This sounds pretty minor, but when you look at after high school, you go from a time frame where school has been set up for you. You have friends there. You see them on a regular basis. You go to sporting events. You go to activities. You hang out with those friends. And then when you leave high school, everyone goes in a different direction. You don't have the same friends anymore. You don't have activities to go to because they're not through the school anymore. It's just very difficult for people. We are social beings. And through COVID, we've noticed how much of a difficult time that is for us to not have those people close to us. And we're creative. We do it through video chat, but it's just not the same. You need that socialness. You need the feeling of belonging. And we've seen a lot of people who haven't had the planning done or haven't had those recreational pieces put in place, and there's a mental health decline. So you see them in their parents' basement playing video games. They don't shower regularly anymore. Like, you just see things going downhill because that's not there anymore. So to have these conversations in high school, really set up what that would look like, whether it's an organization in the community that has an activity, or it could be just another person you meet somewhere, a neighbor, a friend going for coffee with you. Those are all important things. Of course, there's many, many other areas that come within transition planning. So it could be transportation. There's so many different areas. And so, if you start with these three, you'll find those other areas out as well. So one of the questions we get is, what options are there for post-secondary? It is a difficult area because a lot of people want to go there, but don't know what's available based on the schooling you have or what supports you have in place, or that you won't have in place anymore. And so post-secondary, something you should remember about post-secondary. So it's important to remember that it's not modified. So most of the options you're going to see here that we'll talk about, they're not modified. And it's also important to be very realistic about what that looks like. So me coming out of high school saying, I want to be a doctor, but I probably don't have all the classes I need, that's not very realistic, right? Doesn't mean you can't get close to that. Maybe you can be someone who's in a hospital cleaning, where doctors are, or something like that. But when you're looking at post-secondary, you have to be really realistic and help that student be realistic too. A lot of students, I think, if you remember way back in the day when you were in high school, well, for sure me anyways, way back in the day, when I was in high school, I was a dreamer. I dreamt of like all these great things that I wanted to be, and just had no idea that, what that would look like, or what that would consist of, or what supports I would need, or anything like that. So realisticness is important. It sounds so minor, but really it is important. So some of the accommodations that you can get for post-secondary, how you would get these accommodations is to get there's accommodations area usually in a post-secondary institute, or there's an equity services, or there's always a section there for accommodations. And so you would sit down with that counselor and have that conversation. This is where that psychoeducational assessment would come in. you need that to determine what supports you can access from them. So you might get things like exam readers, note takers, tutors, classroom changes, alternative forms of textbooks or assistive technology. There's some really, really cool stuff out there these days. It's really, really neat. So going there and having that conversation with them will tell you exactly what types of supports they're willing to offer. And if they're not offering everything, there's other organizations out there that can help you out a bit, possibly, if you can apply for their funding and get that support. So one of the major options that we see that's just so desired, and it's the only place in the province that has a type of post-secondary like this, is the Campus for All program. Some of you may have heard of it, some of you may have not. It's a great program. A lot of people are interested in it. I'd say like most of my students that want to go to post-secondary, this is the place they want to go. And this is not modified. It's not modified at all. You can go in with any programming that you've taken in school and be accepted. So they are not intended to be a day program. It's a 4-year initiative. It's meant to support authentic student experience and positive possibilities for long-term inclusion. Each student audits one class per semester. It's, I'm probably going to get this wrong because I've said this word about 1 million times and it's a tricky one, it's a tongue twister. Participatory auditing, which means that it's not like traditional auditing where you would just sit in the class. In participatory auditing, there is a lot more stuff that you're involved in. So you might have classwork, you might have group work, you might do a presentation. There's lots of different kind of pieces of it. So it really depends on the prof and what they're willing to have students participate in. The profs at the U of R in particular are really, really great. There's been a lot of different directions they can go, and you can take really almost any avenue of schooling you want to. They're pretty open to it. It's really neat. Students are fully engaged in class learning experience. Students are available, supports are available through students. So they actually have students in some of the classes that can help with the group work or sit down after class and have conversations with the student about what they talked about in class. And then there's also staff in the Campus for All program that can sit down and help out with those supports as well. And then using assistive technology and other tools for reading assignments and lots of different pieces of schooling that they'll be taking. Students are encouraged to make it a priority. The reason that this is something to bring up is because there's only so many spots that can be offered a year. So I think it's between 2 and 4 spots. There's, I want to say 12 spots in total. The university is paying for the tuition. So they have those 12 spots and they've kind of teetered them so that students can get in. There can be students every year instead of everyone going in at the same time. So somewhere between 2 and 4 students each semester get accepted. It can be more difficult to get into because they look for the best fit. It's not like a waiting list. It's in April, May kind of time frame. You fill out the application, you send it in. There's some intricate pieces to it. You need to have some references, and then they do a panel interview, and whoever they feel is best fit, that's who they want. And they want to see independence. And so if you can kind of check off those check marks, they also want to make sure that you're making it a priority because there's a lot of other students that would want to get in there. So there's lots of benefits, and they can contribute to campus life. A lot of my students that I've chatted with about post-secondary, they want to be a part of the campus life just like the other students that have left their school. So it's really great for that. There's coffee shops and lots of stuff around that they can be a part of. And then beyond this, the long-term goal is for students to experience inclusion and meaningful lifelong community in the community after graduation. So they just want people to really be a part of the community, a part of everything, be included. And then they just dropped the age from 21. It used to be 21 because students could stay in school till 22, which they still can. But they dropped it to 18 for the students that are leaving high school. They really wanted to be going right into school. Post-secondary schooling, so they dropped it to the 18 age range. And like I mentioned too, applications come out in the spring. So you have to really get on it. There's a time frame. I think it's usually about the first week of May, and you have to have those applications in. And then they just kind of go through it and figure out who they want to do a panel interview with. And you can go with the student, the parents can go with the student, but they want to see that the student is answering those questions by themselves. I know that's difficult. I mean, it's like an interview. It's very scary, especially for students who haven't done a lot of stuff like that, but that's something to practice. So some benefits would be social connection. So developing different networks of peers, acquaintances, and friends. The coffee shops and the restaurants I was talking about, meeting different students at those coffee shops and restaurants. Just getting family involved, meeting potential employers. The U of R has actually hired quite a few people who were in this program. And then employment. There's a 4 to 40 program. They're specifically for Campus for All students. And so you can participate in career guidance, complete a professional portfolio, work-based learning opportunities, and find and maintain employment. And the supports are accessed through us. So some of those job coaching supports and some of the other supports. Another option is Sask Polytech. That's another really popular one. So this is another place where you can go to an accessibility counselor who will talk about some of those accommodations that you want to make. And some of those could be design seating, learning related supports, funding for learning supports, assistive tools. A lot of the accessibility counselors will actually apply for the funding that's needed for a lot of the supports, which is great because not everybody knows what those are. Other programs that people have been able to access through post-secondary, so these are kind of either accommodation programs or programs that are run a little bit differently. So you can take kind of your normal stream of post-secondary and get the supports. But there's an early childhood education certificate, and it's actually really neat. Some of the classes you can have modified, like some of the classes that you have before getting into this program, you can have modified. Some of them you can't. So a lot of people will go back and upgrade some of those classes that they need with some supports. You only have to take 3 classes, and a lot of people are interested in the early childhood education. So if you can take those 3 classes, you have a certificate. They call it the certificate program, and it's the first level. And you can go up as many levels as you want, but this level, it's really nice because it's only 3 classes. And you can find that information on the website. I believe we put it in the footnotes for you that we'll show you a little bit later. There's also a literacy program. I know it's through Sask Polytech in Regina. I'm not sure which other Sask Polytechs it's also through, but you do an entrance exam, and you don't have to pass it. They just want to see kind of where you're at, and based on that, they'll put you in one of the literacy programs. So you'll be learning more about reading and writing, and practicing some of those things, and really learning more that you may have not learned so much in high school, or that you really need to practice on. So it's kind of neat. Please feel free to ask questions. I know it's a lot of information to take in, but yeah, don't hesitate at any time. We welcome it. And I know sometimes questions come after. That is something that often happens with me. You do not have to hesitate to get back to us. There's lots of us here. We're willing to answer whatever questions you might have. So another option is auditing classes. So I know you can do that at U of R and U of S. I don't know about some of the other post-secondary institutes. I'm sure you probably could. But with my experience at the U of R, I've had a couple of students that have gone through the U of R. So you have to talk to admissions. That's your first step. They don't offer a lot of accommodations. They will offer some things. I think they can get a textbook that's written differently, or there's accommodation for that. But you can get some supports through other organizations. You have to pay half of the tuition. So that's the requirement. You don't get information on the acceptance until after the classes, or pretty well after the classes have started. So it's usually like the week before school starts, or the week of, which is a little rush for people. But if you have support set up, kind of pre-set up, it works just fine. And then what they want to do is like make sure that the people who've paid for full classes get in first. And then if there's some room, then they'll have students that want to audit to come in. And it doesn't count as a credit. But the great thing about this option is that you get a sense of what university is like. If you audit it and it's a little bit too difficult for you, you either will decide that it's not for you or you need more accommodations and supports available. So as much as it sounds kind of like, oh, I don't know if we want to do that, it's only, it's not going to be considered as a credit, or there's some kind of bad things to it, it is a good option for figuring out if that's something really that you'd want to pursue. Some other options, there's a Regina Trades and Skills Center in Regina, of course. Community colleges all around the province. Lots of online courses, and there's specialty and trades courses as well. So like massage therapy is different, IT, broadcasting, hair and makeup, that kind of thing. There's like avant-garde here for hair and makeup. There's lots of different other trades in different areas as well. Funding options, I know I had mentioned one of these already, but student loans, bursaries and scholarships, and the accommodations counselor or the equity services counselor, or whatever the name is of the person at the post-secondary institute, can actually apply for some of the supports for funding. When it comes to the actual schooling itself, there isn't really anybody who will pay for this schooling. There might be an option here or there that we maybe don't know about, but honestly, people will pay for the accommodations, like the organizations may pay for some of the accommodations, but when it comes to the actual schooling, you'd have to go for a student loan or bursary or scholarship. Okay, so I'm going to pass it off. I've done enough talking here. I'm a talkaholic, so I'm going to pass it off to Jasmine and let her continue on with that housing and day programming, that kind of residential and vocational piece.
Okay, so it's important to know about housing options and day programming. If the individual has a CLSD worker, it is important to have a conversation about housing and day programs for the future. We recommend at least having a conversation about housing and day programs, even if that is not something you were planning for right away. Housing and day programs have long emerging needs lists, and you could be on that list for a substantial amount of time. This is why it's crucial to plan ahead so you do not find yourself in a crisis situation. And then there are several different residential options that are offered by CLSD. So there is approved private service homes, which provide a supportive family living environment in a community setting. Residents have the opportunity to develop social and life skills. They have group homes, which are staffed to provide personal care, supervision, and support for adults. They are located in residential neighborhoods throughout the province. There is group living homes, so people share a group living home and are responsible for paying for basic shelter costs. CLSD provides funding for support staff as needed. And then there's supported living programs. So this provides adults living in their own houses with limited support and supervision so they can live as independently as possible. And if you'd like more information on those residential options, you can contact your CLSD worker. And if employment is not the plan for the student after high school, then day programs can be a good option. So day programs support people to participate in work and leisure activities and develop life skills. So programs include job training, supported employment opportunities, life skills development, socialization, and recreation. It's important to ensure that you completed or update your assessment with CLSD if you're wanting to pursue these options. The individual and family can attend residential and day program tours to help determine what places would be the best fit for the individual. And if you do not meet CLSD mandate, there are other options, which could include you getting support from an inclusion consultant to discuss your options. There's also CDS funding, which can be used if there's an unmet need. There are also other options or potential options for affordable housing, such as Regina Housing or the Saskatchewan Housing Authority or Milton Heights. There's other ones too. And then for that recreation piece, so recreation and socialization are important aspects of our lives. It's important to have a plan for socialization for the individual after high school. Students are used to the routine of school. Students are used to having their day planned out, and when they're done school, the routine of activities, friends, and school is not there anymore. So look into opportunities in your community that you can connect with before you leave high school. So some examples of programs or activities that you can get involved in would be local inclusion branches, or maybe the Special Olympics, or Sask Abilities has a social drop-in, or you could be involved with sporting activities. There's many different options. It is important that the student puts themselves out there and is able to meet new individuals and develop friendships that will last outside of high school. If the individual does not have that socialization piece in their lives, then we often see mental health decline. And once mental health decline happens, it is difficult to get the person back on their feet and get their skills back. Mentorship is another possibility to help the individual work on socialization and other skills. So mentorship can be accessed from cognitive disability strategy, although it has to be an unmet need. You can also access Eagle's Heart's Nest in Regina for mentorship, and there may be other mentorship options around depending on where you live. And then employment. So here are some employment agencies and services that can help students achieve successful employment. So this list includes entrepreneurship support, traditional employment support, and pre-employment programs. So at Inclusion Saskatchewan, we often refer to other organizations if necessary, because we do not have the capacity to support all employment needs. We differ from other programs because there are only 4 of us across the province. So we're unable to help with certain things such as job searching. We try to reach out to rural areas or individuals who don't fit into any program. And this list goes over other organizations that may be beneficial to look into to help best fit the employment needs of an individual, depending on what assistance they may need. So in regards to entrepreneurship, you may want to look into the Women's Entrepreneurship Program, or SICKLE, which is an entrepreneurship program for people with a disability. And sometimes even at Inclusion Saskatchewan, we have some entrepreneurship help. In regards to traditional employment, some agencies and organizations that could be beneficial include there's Partners in Employment, Canadian Council on Rehabilitation, South Saskatchewan Independent Living Centre, and then there's North Saskatchewan Independent Living Centre, Autism Resource Centre, Inclusion Saskatchewan, and there are other employment agencies in other small towns and different areas also. And then pre-employment programs specifically are great to get individuals ready for employment. So they go over a lot of helpful tools and they teach individuals the skills that they will need in the workplace. So some agencies and organizations that offer pre-employment programs are Saskabilities, Radius, Autism Resources, Canadian Council on Rehabilitation, and South Saskatchewan Independent Living Centre. And these are just some of them. And now I'll hand it over to Marcy, who will talk about staying in school until 22.
Awesome. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay, perfect. Awesome. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't still muted. Okay, so individuals are able to stay in school until they're 22. I'm not sure who knows that or who doesn't. There is a lot of confusion with that, but they are allowed to stay in school until their 22nd birthday. So it isn't always the option for everyone, but it is sometimes a good option for some people who are maybe not ready. So maybe they haven't been able to secure employment. Maybe they haven't had enough time to get their transition planning done. They might need to work on more skills and abilities, that kind of thing. And even with COVID, apparently I say COVID weird, but COVID, even with COVID, there is a lot of people who had a plan already, who that plan just can't work out this year because of COVID. So I think it's important for people to have a plan A, plan B, plan C, and this is often the plan B or plan C for a lot of people. So I should actually switch the slide here. There we go. There is some options, and transition looks different for everybody when they're staying in school till they're 22. But here's kind of some of the options that I've seen personally. So a student may be taking some life skills classes like transition plan or life trans and cooking and some kind of those life skill building classes in the morning, and maybe working on specific skills in the afternoon. So it's some money management, working with customers, relationship building, that kind of thing. Another plan I've seen is taking some of those life skills classes and then also working on some of those pieces that I was talking about, for those very specific pieces for that individual in the morning, and doing a work experience in the afternoon. We've seen students do a work experience throughout the whole entire day, just do different work experiences so they get a little bit more experience and they're able to kind of build those skills a bit more. And then also we've had students that have done work experience, and then as soon as it's ready to turn into transition or into paid employment, they've contacted us or another organization to take over and help with those supports when the employment is paid employment. So we've seen like lots of different options. Really depends on what the student's ready for, and as well as school division. Each school division is different about what they'll offer, and also with the funding that they can give each student after they stay after high school they've graduated high school. So it can look different for everybody. Everybody's plan is different, and like I said, a plan A, plan B, plan C is really important. It's not good to put all your eggs in one basket. We've seen too many transitions that have fallen apart because of that. So we are highly suggesting making extra plans. And if this is a part of the plan, this is really good to start having that conversation in grade 12 about what this is going to look like after, and what the school is able to put the funding in place for, and what this schooling could look like afterwards. So it is an option, but it might just look different. And that's really up to you and the teacher and the student. So just to give you an idea, what a transition plan, some of the transition plan outcomes we've seen. So we've seen really bad ones, we've seen good ones, we've seen great ones. It's just different for everyone. But I mean, obviously our hopes are that people leave and they have their support set up. So a transition plan gone wrong. So these are some of the areas that we can see that a transition would have not succeeded. No assessment was done, so the student is unable to get programs. And then you see a gap in services, and the assessment can take a year to 3 years to get done. So if you can imagine not being able to apply for services or be a part of services because you don't have that assessment for 1 to 3 years, that's a big gap. And a lot of people, that's where you see that decline in mental health or in the supports that they need. So the other thing too is once you leave high school, now it is your responsibility to pay for it. So we've seen parents pay like $1,500 to $2,000 for that psychoeducational assessment. It's quite hefty, but it's important, right? You can't get the supports and services you need. So that's why we highly push for it to be done in the school system. We don't want you to have to pay that much money. And that's a long period of time to wait. And you have 4 years to do the assessment too. So that's a long time to have that assessment done. The student is not connected with organizations or agencies. So the last thing that we want is for a student to leave and not know who they could call if something goes wrong. And we've seen that quite a bit. There is no transition plan set up before leaving high school. We've also seen that quite a bit. Planning starts in grade 11 or 12, and there's not enough time to do a transition plan. Don't panic if that's where you're at. Planning still can be done. It's just a little bit more harder for people because they don't really have that time to process things and to get most of the support set up right away. We've had some people contact us like 6 months before graduation or after graduation and say, okay, we're ready for transition planning. But that is not enough time to get a transition plan done. And that's where we see the plan just fall apart, crumble. Even any teeny little bit of plan that you would have had, it just crumbles. We know that people need time to process this stuff. So it's important to do this as early as possible. You really need to have that processing time. And it's very emotional for parents and students. So this is a time for, that time for you to really process it. We've seen a lot of students have mental health decline. And this is the saddest for me because they lose a lot of their skills. They have a hard time getting back on track. They don't feel like they're doing something that's worthwhile. It's really sad to see. We don't want to see that. It's terrible. The student has a loss of skills, a loss of motivation, a decline in communication, a loss of drive, difficulty and the length of time for them to pick themselves back up and learn those skills again. They've had years to learn them and now they have to just pick it back up. Difficulty in relationships. We've seen people who have unstable housing or are homeless, and no plan for the student during the day. So they're kind of twiddling their thumbs playing video games at home and it just doesn't work out very well. That motivation is lost after that. This is what I would call a successful transition plan. And just to mention, it's quite rare for you to have everything all line up perfectly, but if most things are lining up, that's a successful one in our eyes. So all the members of the team ensure that they are following through with their parts of the planning. If you give the student options and choices, they are going to have less stress about that. If the team uses a person-centered approach, if everyone is on the same page, if there is respect between everyone, and I say that because there is a lot of, if I always say leave your stuff at the door. You can be professional no matter who you like, don't like, have an issue with. You need to be able to leave that at the door, or the transition planning doesn't go very successfully. If everyone is open-minded and willing to adapt to a changing plan, because it does change. If you bring agencies and resources in early enough, if you can make sure that the student feels comfortable and part of the meeting, that they understand what's going on. It's important to not talk about the student, but to talk to the student so that they are a part of the conversation. A lot of people will talk like the student isn't in the room, and that is very difficult for a lot of students that I work with. It's important to get the planning done in high school because supports are cut off after that. You do not have teachers that are going to help you with that guidance piece, and there isn't anyone else that's going to come and kind of be in that place. You'll have bits and pieces here, but it's scary afterwards. Not to say that we wouldn't be there to help you or that you wouldn't have organizations, but it's best to get the planning done earlier. And then transportation, having that transportation set up is so important. That is your method to getting to socialization, that socialization piece, that recreational piece. It's also important for getting to a job or getting to post-secondary. And I mean, that doesn't have to necessarily be a driver's license or walking or taking your bike. It could be a paratransit or the public bus route system. As long as you have that stuff set up, that's so important. Having that plan A, plan B, and plan C. And I'm sure you're probably sick of me saying that, but that's so important. I say that because we have seen so many things break down because of that. So make sure you have those plans set in place. Understand what supports are available in your community. That's important. You need to know who to get on your team so that those supports can be set up early enough. Information collection. Students change over time, and every year there should be some collection. And that's from mom and dad, that's from school, that's from work placement, that's from everywhere, because a student is different in every environment and with different people. And so how they communicate, what supports they're going to need, what type of help they might need in certain areas, like just all of the pieces of information you want someone to know about the student. And that could be in a group home, or a supported living home, or could be support staff that come, or a recreational activity. The more information you can give someone, the better it's going to be for the student to access those services they need. And also less anxiety about the transition out of school, because they're a part of the process. They need to be a part of, they need to understand what's going on. And then it's important for the school, this is going to sound really funny, but it's important for the school and the parents to work together. So like I said, different environment, students work in just kind of different ways. They get support in different ways. So if they're frustrated, this teacher might support them differently than when they're at home and mom and dad are supporting them. And so that communication with the school, so that you're very consistent and that both people are kind of supporting in the best possible way. Everyone's on the same page. And that willingness to share is often a vulnerable thing, but it is so important for the success of the student. A lot of people are thinking, oh, the school is going to judge me. They're going to say, how can you do that? But the communication between parents and the student as well, if the student can express what they need and what they want, that's important too. You need to really understand what they need on both sides and be consistent. And then when they go into a work placement, you might have some ideas of things that would help them out. If they get frustrated at work. This is what we do at home, and this is something we could try. And then for parents, remember, it's okay to cry. I'd say most of my parents, there's at least one parent in most of my meetings that's crying, and that's okay, because this process is just as much as difficult for you as it is for students. You're transitioning as well. You're transitioning from your child being a child and you taking care of them, to them being an adult and having more choices and responsibilities. That's scary. And we totally get that. So it's okay to cry. It's okay. I usually bring a box of Kleenexes. It's totally okay. So that now we're going to talk about adulthood. So now you finished high school. Now we're getting into adulthood. So this is some kind of important decisions to make. So a will. Everyone's like, oh, I know what a will is. But there's some important pieces of information that you'll need to know when it comes to a will. So first of all, a will is a legal document that's prepared by someone, during their lifetime or after their life. Now, there is a Dependents Act. It's called the Dependents Relief Act 2. And it has more information about what you need to leave for, if you have a child with a disability, what is required for you to leave in your will. A lot of lawyers don't know that these are things that you need to have in your will. We do have more information in our roadmap to the future, which I believe we connected. We attached that into the email, but if you don't have a copy, please let me know because we can definitely get it. It's also on our website, and it has a lot of these resources that you need to know about. So make sure that, when you're looking at a will, that you have all of the pieces in place. Look at that at Dependents Relief Act 2 and make sure that you have those pieces. We aren't experts, which is why we often send you to the Roadmap to the Future book, because it is a planning tool. It's a planning tool for a lot of these pieces, and it'll give you a lot of great information. Saskatchewan Insured Income for Disability, also known as SED. So this is income. It's an income support program for people with disabilities, just to get those extra supports in place. So it just gives them a little bit more choice in services and supports in the community, which is important. So this is used, when the individual is looking at housing. This can cover the rent, it can cover bills, it can cover, sometimes it covers benefits, so like glasses or like eye appointments, that kind of thing, medications. So this is something that we often tell people about, and it's important to get connected with SED on your 18th birthday. That's as early as you can apply for this program. And there's also information in the roadmap, and there's a link on the presentation here, as well as at the bottom for this information. You can get a lot more information from there. The disability tax credit, if you haven't heard about it, it's a non-refundable tax credit that helps persons with disabilities or their support person reduce the amount of income tax they have to pay, which is great. There's also a link on here to Revenue Canada that will give you a bit more information about it. And the Registered Disability Savings Plan, so the RDSP. So it's a long-term savings plan to help Canadians with disabilities and their families save for the future. So it's essentially a retirement plan for people with disabilities. And you can contribute to the RDSP until you turn 59, or the beneficiary turns 59, and it's not tax deductible. And the money is untouchable. So with SED, you can only have so much in your bank account. This is untouchable money. So the money that is put into this account, SED cannot consider as income, and a lot of other people can't too. It's a great retirement savings plan. We all really want to plan for the future, and this is a really great plan. And there's more information as well on here, Revenue Canada here, and they're in the roadmap to the future. It gives you lots more as well. Supported decision making. So this is one of the things Chandria was talking about. So supported decision making is a process of acting with an individual to discover their values, interests, talents, and gifts in order to support them to choose the way they want to live their life. So this is more of it's the way you support someone, so they have decisions that they want themselves, but you're there to kind of support in those decisions. It sounds so something like you think you do all the time, but there's a certain way you go about it. So supported decision making is a very good tool for involving people with disabilities in making decisions about their life. Even if the parents feel that obtaining a guardianship order is the way to go, they can still use supported decision making to involve their son or daughter as much as possible. So I think our concern is always, people rushing to get the support and maybe getting the wrong support set up for them. So supported decision making is great because it's a way for the individuals to still have that control, but for you to be there as a team of supports around that person to really help them educate maybe where their plan could go wrong, or all the great things that they're doing, or, okay, this is what you want to do, how do we go about doing it? It's really awesome. And you'll see a lot of people using this plan now. So now I'm going to hand it over to Jasmine. I promise we're almost done. I'm just gonna let her talk a little bit about some of the resources that we have.
All right, so this is the last section. So due to time restrictions, we're just going to briefly go over some of these resources, but the PowerPoint has been sent out to everyone. So you're more than welcome to look back at the PowerPoint if you're interested in more information on these resources. So here are just some outside organizations and supports that may be beneficial. So we have Inclusion Saskatchewan, CLSD, Community Living Service Delivery, Cognitive Disability Strategy, Saskatchewan Assured Income for Disability. There are also some organizations that have a main focus on a specific disability, such as Autism Services or the FASD Network. And then here are just some ideas of different areas to look into in your area. So look into some supportive employment, residential supports, day programming, high school and post-secondary programs and funding. And then the 211 website. So this is a great website that includes resources from all around Saskatchewan. And then Inclusion Saskatchewan supports. So we have a family network. So there's a parent network where parents are around Saskatchewan connect with each other and share resources with each other. We have a siblings network. So this is a network where siblings connect with other siblings. We have a self-advocate group. So our various self-advocacy groups and events are designed to aid individuals with intellectual disabilities in becoming advocates for themselves and for others. And then we have inclusion consultants. So that's what Chandria, that's her position. So Inclusion Saskatchewan inclusion consultants work with individuals and their families by connecting them with the appropriate services and resources. Inclusion consultants can provide information and assist with navigating through any system such as healthcare, social service, education, mental health, justice, and so on. And then we have employment and transition facilitators. So that's what me and Marcy do. And then there's also Karen and Sheila. So Inclusion Saskatchewan's employment and transitions facilitators help students transition from high school to adulthood. And we also provide employment supports to students and adults. And then some of our resources. So we have Navigating the System. So this is an advocacy handbook for parents and children with intellectual disabilities. It features information on respite, early childhood intervention, education, medical care, and many other systems. And then we have roadmaps to the future. So this puts complex situations and terms into easy to grasp language. It provides background information for those who must plan for individuals with a disability. This guide includes what to consider when preparing a will, how to choose executors and trustees, how to make the most of RDSPs. It has information on the SED income program and information about guardianship and decision making. And then we also have the Transition Planning Handbook. So this handbook was developed in response to concerns of parents and educators about the lack of options open to young people with intellectual disabilities leaving the educational system. And it's a useful guide for students and families as they move through school and into adulthood. And all these resources and other resources are located under publications and resources on our website. And then just a little bit about Community Living Service Delivery, so CLSD. They're a branch of social services that help people experiencing intellectual disabilities access a variety of community-based residential services and day programs. CLSD staff work to ensure that the physical, emotional, and social needs of people experiencing intellectual disabilities are met, and that they are able to live as independently as possible within their own communities. And then Cognitive Disability Strategy, also known as CDS, is a funding program under the Ministry of Social Services intended to improve the availability of assessment and diagnosis services, provide services to address the unmet needs of people with cognitive disabilities and their families, and provide training opportunities to enhance the knowledge and skill of people who provide services to individuals with cognitive disabilities. And then we also use a lot of acronyms in this work, and we know that it's difficult to know what all these acronyms stand for, so we have formulated a list to share with you. So there are not all the acronyms out there on that list. There's a bunch, but here are just some. So these will not only be good for you to know what they mean, but they also help you give an idea of organizations and agencies to look into in your area. And then we also just attached some list of behavior terms. And then we ended with footnotes at the end of the presentation with some links that you can access to some websites that we mentioned above. And then I'll just let Marcy have some ending remarks before questions, and then we'll be almost done.
Awesome. Awesome, awesome. So if there's any questions, this is really rare for us to not get any questions, but if there's any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box. And we're gonna, right after this, we're gonna stay for any questions you may have. I know it's kind of into supper here, but again, feel free if you can't do it now to come back to us. Before we go, I just wanted to thank everyone, and you're welcome to put your cameras back on. I'd love to see your lovely faces. Just wanted to thank you so much for coming. I hope that you were able to get some really useful information. We just wanted to give you as much information as we could to help you guide through this, because we know a lot of parents and a lot of students are really struggling with this process. We did have a webinar earlier for teachers and professionals as well. And so I guess our hopes are that a lot of people are going to have some education in this area, and that people are going to be able to walk away with some really great plans in place. And then also, like,